Hi there, good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to Brixton's Wednesday night, Brixton Buddhist Community's Wednesday night meditation and Buddhism class. So my name is Viryanaka, so I'm an ordained member of the True Buddhist Order and also a teacher at Brixton. And I'm just going to host this evening. So we've got Suddhaka joining us, who's another of Brixton's teachers via the remote link. But I'll bring him in a minute. But I'm just going to let you know what we're going to do tonight. So in a moment, I'm going to we'll salute the shrine. I'll explain what that is in a moment for those of you that haven't done that before. But it's very traditional and something we do every Wednesday night when we run our physical classes. And then Suddhaka will be leading meditation, and he'll be giving a talk on what the Buddha said about being human. And there'll be an opportunity for questions as well. So if you've got any questions or thoughts throughout any of this stream, do drop them in the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer those towards the end of this stream. And then also just to say that after this live stream event, there will also be a discussion group on Zoom that you're welcome to join in with. So we'll be posting the link in the description and in the chat room as well. So I'm going to just start by saluting the shrine. And saluting the shrine is basically just turning towards the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the Buddha representing the spiritual ideal of development, of growth. The Dharma being the path, or the way to get there, or the approach, the method to get there, and the Sangha being the spiritual community. So you're very welcome to join in with me, or you can just watch. It's only a very short little ritual. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dhammaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Namah. Om. Ho. Great. So I always really like saluting the shrine. It makes us feel that we've got off to a good start. So yeah, once again, a very, very warm welcome from me to our stream. So I'm going to, with the magic of the internet, I'm now going to bring in Suddhaka, who's in neighbouring Dulwich. We're all, of course, still in lockdown here. So and some of us in our community are unwell. So we've through the power of the internet produced Suddhaka as if by magic. So very, very warm welcome to you, Suddhaka.
Thank you very much, Viryanaka.
Yeah, very, very, very warm welcome. So let me just give you a quick introduction before I hand over to you. Suddhaka is a good friend. So me and Suddhaka have been leading a Dharma study group in Brixton for a number of years together. And I've got to know him a bit during this time. And he's I sort of experience him as a man of great integrity, warmth, and also real depth. There's always Suddhaka always seems to come out with some real gems of knowledge and wisdom in the study group. So it's actually a real delight for me to introduce Suddhaka. Usually we would do this for our sort of visiting guests, but not so much for our regular teachers. So it's a real delight to be able to introduce you and have you on the stream, Suddhaka, have you joining us from your own place, your own house. So what I'll do is I'll just hand over to you, and you can just lead us in the evening.
Thank you very much, Viryanaka. Yeah, so when I agreed to do this class, I assumed that we'd be holding the class as usual in Yoga Point. I'd be sitting in front of that little round window above Yoga Point in the usual way. But of course, as things have changed, I'm now speaking to you from my little room at the back of the house in East Dulwich. And actually, this is the first time I've ever done a teaching on any kind of virtual platform. So if I make some mistakes, do please bear with me. I'm a complete novice at this online communication. So this evening, I thought we'd start with a period of the Metta Bhavana practice. And I won't say too much to lead us through it. I'll just ring the bells for the stages as usual. And when we finish the Metta Bhavana practice, I'll give a short talk entitled "What the Buddha Said About Being Human," with some reflections on the events of the past few weeks and the current situation with the coronavirus pandemic, of course. So, if you'd like to find a comfortable position for meditation, closing your eyes, taking the focus of your attention inwards. Feeling the weight of your body resting on the ground, your pelvis balanced on the cushion or the chair, your spine rising up from your pelvis, upright but flexible, shoulders drawing slightly back, and the crown of the head drawn up towards the ceiling as though pulled up into the sky by an invisible thread, with your chin tucked in so that your spine can lengthen, and the crown of your head and your pelvis can be drawn apart. Drawing your shoulders slightly back so your chest can be open and express an attitude of confidence, strength. And feel the breath moving in the front of your body and allowing the breath to encourage a sense of settling, a sense of calming in the body. We may have been dealing with some quite complex situations over the last few days. And this is a chance to withdraw the focus of our attention from those complexities and come back instead to the simplicity of our felt experience in the present moment. And as we do this, we can feel we're coming back to a calm, still inner space from which we can reconnect with our energy and our resources. And as we come back to that still, calm, quiet inner space, we say to ourselves, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from harm and difficulty of all kinds. And so we begin the Metta Bhavana. bringing the meditation to an end, opening our eyes.
Just feel free to launch into the talk, Suddhaka, when you're ready.
That's fine. Well, it's been quite a few weeks, hasn't it? I guess a month ago, none of us could have dreamt that our lives would have changed so much in such a short space of time. And I was thinking, you know, however long we practice Buddhism and however many talks we listen to about impermanence and however much we reflect on impermanence, when things change, it seems to always come to us as something of a shock, doesn't it? We never quite seem to be ready for when things change. I was thinking that only a few months ago I went out and I did what I always do in every November, and I bought myself a new diary. I mean, I'm quite old school. I like to have a diary that's like a book that I actually write things in on. In fact, I've got it here. I've got a nice red diary here with don't know whether you can see, it's got 2020 written on the front in rather nice gold letters. So at the start of the year, I did what I always do at the start of the year, was I went through my diary and I wrote in all the activities that I had planned for the year. I had retreats, I had various different work meetings, I had trips to India, some holidays. And while I was making the plans, I was assuming, I guess, that things would be more or less the same as they were last year. And I had a sense that by putting things in my diary, I could somehow control the future. I could make things happen in the way that I wanted them to happen. And of course, you know, like everybody else on the planet, over the last few weeks, all my plans have been ruined. All my plans have just completely been cancelled and dissolved. And it's been quite an interesting watching my experience as all this has unfolded. You know, I noticed that I have a very particular response to when things change. It's almost like in the moment that I realize something's going to be changed or something cancelled, my mind kind of goes into a kind of blank. It's a bit like, I can't believe what's happening. I'd sort of, when I was making a plan, I'd created a mental picture of how things were going to be in the future. And in that moment, that mental picture just pops like a bubble. And I'm left with this strange sense of openness, this strange unknowability of not knowing what's going to happen, not being able to alter things to fit in with my wishes. And I think it's quite an interesting experience, that, because I think in that moment, maybe there's an opportunity to just get a glimpse of, you know, the open and empty dimension of how things really are all the time. You know, when we reflect on it, the future is always completely open. The future is always unknown. We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. We assume that tomorrow will be more or less like today, and that things will follow a more or less regular pattern. But we don't know that. In a way, the future is always unknown. I was thinking, actually, one of the people who's found it easiest to adapt to this is actually my mother-in-law, who's 96 and grew up in London during the Second World War. And she and her friends used to go out dancing in the Blitz. And so I think she grew up with a very, very strong sense that from one day to another, you didn't really know what was going to happen, and that the people around you may or may not be here, you know, over a period of time. So in a sense, I think she has a wisdom that comes from this, and maybe, you know, my generation, which has grown up in a time of, you know, relative stability and predictability, we're not so good at adapting to these kind of changes. So anyway, now we find ourselves in completely unknown and uncharted territory. We were joking that the most overused word of the last few weeks has been unprecedented. If you notice that the politicians and the news readers keep saying, this is unprecedented, this is unprecedented. So And it's true in a way. We find ourselves in a situation where, well, we know that everything's been cancelled, we know that everything's been put on hold, but we don't know for how long. So the future is unknown. And, you know, thinking about the situation, one has to acknowledge the very, very genuine suffering and distress that's going on for so many people. I mean, I'm sure there's people tuning into this who, you know, have significant anxiety about their own health, about the health of their loved ones who may be vulnerable. Maybe people who have significant anxieties about livelihood, about where the money is going to come from, about how the enterprises they're involved in will fare through this period. So there are real difficulties and real suffering going on there. And yet at the same time, as I know, you know, many of us have been talking about over the last few weeks, for a Dharma practitioner, the current situation offers some really valuable opportunities. So I just thought I'd focus a little bit on, you know, in a way, what this current situation can teach us and how this current situation can support us in our attempt to transform ourselves through the practice of the Dharma. So first of all, I guess most of us have an opportunity to slow down a bit. I know that, you know, my life is significantly less busy than it would normally be since I've started working from home. So there's an opportunity to slow down, perhaps to live a little bit more mindfully than I usually do in the sort of rush and busyness of my usual life, my usual traveling around from place to place. And you could say that the crisis throws us back a little bit on our own resources. We can't distract ourselves so easily through so much external activity, through traveling around so much, through interacting with so many people in so many situations. So it throws us back on ourselves and our own resources. And it's an opportunity for us to practice a bit more stillness and simplicity. As the poet Rayakan said, if you want to know the truth, stop chasing after so many things. So this is an opportunity for us all to stop chasing after so many things. And already I think we've seen some opportunities for a new depth and new kinds of connection. You know, whether it be neighbours helping each other or friends finding ways to meet up via online platforms during the time they can't meet face to face. My dad was telling me he's 88 and lives alone, and he was telling me that he was contacted out of the blue by somebody who lives about 10 doors further down his street, who was offering help, was saying that she was willing to come around and help him with his shopping. And this was somebody that he'd lived on the same street as for a long time, but who'd never met before, who'd never encountered before. And this woman had reached out to him, called him up to offer her support. And you know, he was really touched by that. I mean, that was really a big thing for him. There's an opportunity for us to reflect on what's really important for us. There's an opportunity for us to give more of our time and energy to the things that really matter to us, and to let go of the unnecessary clutter of business and the kind of trivial things we involve ourselves in. I'm rather embarrassed to admit how much time and headspace for me was going into football before the start of this crisis. And I actually got a teaching from the manager of my own team, Mr. Jurgen Klopp, who said, when the season was put on hold, he said, football is the most important of all the things that don't matter at all. Good quote. So from a Dharmic perspective, this is an opportunity for us to let go of all the things that don't matter at all, including football, I'm afraid to say. So I've been finding that the current situation puts the Buddhist teachings into very sharp focus. So teachings that I usually take for granted, in a way, just sort of take for granted that they're true and don't really think about much, can suddenly come into really sharp focus and seem much more clear and urgent. And I just wanted to share one of the teachings of the Buddha. This series is entitled What the Buddha Said About. So I wanted to share one teaching of the Buddha that says something about the experience of being a human being and living in the world, and touches on the kind of issues that we've been thinking and reflecting on in the last few weeks. So the sutta is called the Upajjhatthana Sutta. I hope I've said that right. Upajjhatthana Sutta. And it's where the Buddha puts forward 5 reflections. So in the sutta, the Buddha says, there are these 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman, a man, lay, or ordained. Which 5? I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. This is the first fact that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I will grow different, separated from all that is dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, my karma, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do for evil or for good, to that I will become heir. These are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. So the Buddha is saying that this applies to everybody. It's not a specialist teaching, it's a teaching that applies to everybody equally. And he's saying, well, these are facts. These are undeniable truths about our existence. Whatever else we may think, whether we're left wing or right wing, I know whether we were Brexiteers or Remainers, whatever the situations of our lives, these are the unalterable facts of our situation, that we are subject to old age, to illness, to death, to separation and loss, and that our happiness or our unhappiness is determined by our actions, by our skillful or unskillful actions. And the Buddha puts these forward as the basic facts of our human life. So we reflect that we are and always have been subject to old age, sickness and death. We reflect that eventually everything that can be lost will be lost. Everything that can be lost will be lost. Everything that we can let go of, eventually we will have to let go of. And I guess the aim of this teaching is to help us learn to hold everything more lightly, to hold everything more lightly, and to realize that eventually we'll need to let go of all our attachments, all our preferences. And so you could say from this point of view, from the point of view of the Buddha's teaching about the human condition, what this crisis is doing essentially is showing us, or making very clear to us, what our existential situation has been all along, all of our lives actually. You could say that from a Buddhist point of view, we've always been in a pandemic. The human condition itself is a pandemic. We really don't know how much time we've got, and what time we have is precious, and what time we have we need to use as wisely as we possibly can. So quite sobering, quite a sobering reflection, which hopefully helps us clear away all the clutter and all the trivia from our lives, and helps us refocus on what is really essential, what is really, really important to us. But the sutta goes on. We don't just limit our reflection to ourselves. So the Buddha goes on to say that we also need to reflect that not just us, but actually everyone, every human being is equally subject to these things. So the Buddha goes on to say, further, a disciple of the noble ones considers this: I am not the only one subject to illness who has not gone beyond illness. I am not the only one subject to death who has not gone beyond death. I am not the only one who will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. A disciple of the noble ones considers this: I am not the only one who is owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related through my karma, and has my karma as my arbitrator. All beings are the owners of their karma, heir to their karma, born of their karma, related through their karma, and have their karma as their arbitrator. Whatever all beings do for good or evil, to that they will fall heir. Then he goes on to say, when he or she often reflects on this, the factors of the path take birth. He or she sticks with that path, develops it, cultivates it. As he or she sticks with that path, develops it and cultivates it, the fetters are abandoned, the obsessions destroyed. So maybe the first part of the sutta is very, very sobering. But I think in the second part of the sutta, the Buddha is encouraging us, and this seems to be a really, really important point, encouraging us to put our own personal experience into the much bigger context of the universal human condition. I know this is something that actually a lot of philosophy does. It's one of the sort of purposes of philosophy. You could say that philosophy exists to help us understand our own personal limited experience as part of a much bigger context. And the idea of reflecting this way, the idea of putting our experience into this bigger context, is that it is comforting to do that. You could say that when we're in a difficult situation, when we're suffering or in difficulty, we can make our situation worse by adding in a story that our suffering is unique and personal to ourselves. And by doing that, we kind of turn inwards around our suffering. We become egocentric around our suffering. And through that, we can feel sort of isolated and cut off from the world around us and from our friends and from other living beings. But if we can reflect that our experience is part of a much bigger picture, that in a way what we're experiencing is a tiny part of a kind of vast, universal human experience, or even greater than a human experience, an experience of all living beings, then it becomes much easier to accept our experience as it is, to sort of keep our experience in some kind of perspective. And I think this thing about the sort of universal human experience is there's quite an interesting point somebody was mentioning about this coronavirus, that the coronavirus is really the first time, certainly in my lifetime, that there's been a common issue that affects the whole of humanity in the same way at the same time. So, you know, even with global warming, you have some people obviously experiencing the effects very intensely and other people carrying on as if nothing was wrong. But with this, it's very, very clear, I think, to everybody on the planet at this very moment that, you know, they're in danger of catching this disease, that everybody on the planet has to do something to contain the virus and to change their behaviors in certain ways. And I think that's very interesting that, well, really for the first time that I can remember, maybe for the first time in history, actually, there's one particular situation that every single person on the planet is encountering at the same time in the same way. So, you know, we are definitely all in this together when it comes to this crisis. There's a wonderful quote from the Vimlakirti Nadesha that Padmavajra shared in a very good talk the other day. He said, you know, the Bodhisattva Vimlakirti in the sutra, he said, "I am sick because all living beings are sick." And I think that's amazing, amazing quotation and amazing reflection. You know, if we're suffering, if we have difficulty, we often ask, well, why? Why are we having this difficulty? Why are we suffering in this way? And we can reflect, well, we're suffering this way almost because living beings suffer in this way, that suffering in this way is part of the whole vast picture of human life and the human condition. And when we think in this way, rather than closing in defensively around our experience, we kind of open outwards. And this opening outwards, is a really essential part of developing the path to enlightenment, developing wisdom and compassion that constitutes enlightened mind. So I guess this is the real opportunity in the middle of all of this. This is the kind of center of the bullseye, if you like. If we can train ourselves to stay present to our own experience, particularly our own experience of suffering, unease, dis-ease, if we can stay present to our own experience of dukkha rather than turning away from it or numbing ourselves or distracting ourselves from it, then that can put us in touch with something really, really valuable from a spiritual point of view. It can put us in touch, you could say, with our innate sensitivity, our innate capacity for compassion. And through that, we build our capacity to empathize with others. And the teachings, certainly the teachings of Mahayana, emphasize that this sensitivity, this ability to empathize with others, to put our own experience into the context of the experience of others, is what develops eventually into the arising of the bodhicitta, into the coming about of the wonderful compassionate aspect of the enlightened mind. So this is the path, really. This is the path, rather than closing in around the suffering and difficulty and uncertainty and the stress that we may be experiencing. We try to find a way to put that into a bigger context. We try and find a way to use that experience to connect to the universal experience of all living beings, so that rather than isolating ourselves and cutting ourselves off, we're actually expanding outwards and connecting more and more deeply and more widely. And then we have the final reflection that the Buddha offers us, the fifth reflection, which is the reflection on karma, on actions and their consequences. So probably if we don't know anything else about Buddhism, we should know that the central Buddhist teaching is that suffering arises out of unskillful mental states, and that happiness arises from skillful mental states. It's probably the first thing about Buddhism that you should learn, and yet it's probably the thing that we need to come back to more and more often, because we need to reflect on this again and again and again, that if we want to be happy, we become happy by changing our behavior. We change our actions of body, speech and mind, making our actions more skillful, and gradually weaning ourselves off unskillful actions and unskillful mental states. So we need to reflect that when we act out of kindness and generosity, that creates an outcome of happiness for ourselves and others. When we act out of aversion or fear, that tends to create more suffering for ourselves and others. And this is really good news from a Buddhist perspective. It means that, in a way, we can do stuff to create a happier life for ourselves and others. It's a very empowering thing. Whatever situation we're in, however bad things may be, we can always move the situation in a positive direction through the way that we act and the way that we respond. And Buddhism, for this reason, talks about human life, human existence, as a precious opportunity. And the traditional Tibetan Buddhists thought that, in a way, animals and other life forms don't have the same opportunity as human beings have to shape ourselves and our experience in the way that we can through our self-reflexive consciousness. So we can reflect a lot on this idea that human life is a precious opportunity, that every moment is unique, every moment is a precious gift that won't come again, and that everything that we do, everything that we think, has some effect on the world around us and on ourselves. And one of the things I've been reflecting on around this crisis is that, we tend to think that this crisis has come along, and then when it's over, things will go back to how they were before. But of course, if we think about it, we realise that it's not going to be like that. Actually, this crisis will go on for a certain time, then it will come to an end, and then things will start again, but they'll start in a different place to where they left off. So after this crisis, the world will be a different place to how it was a week or 2 weeks ago. And so, we can think about, well, how do we want that change to be? What world is it that we want to see at the end of this crisis? And what can we do right now to help in our own small way to bring that new world about? So in these times, there's so many opportunities to support each other, so many opportunities to strengthen our communities, so many opportunities to deepen the communication between us, so many opportunities to practice listening more carefully to each other, to empathizing more thoroughly with each other. And in this way, if we can do this, then we'll help to make this new world that happens after the crisis come into being in the shape that we want. And I guess, I think many of us, will have difficulties, do have difficulties now, and will have difficulties over the coming months. But I think, relative to other people, we could reflect that, we have many relative privileges and many relative opportunities relative to how other people are in the world. And there's opportunities to reflect on what's positive in our lives and develop gratitude and appreciation for all the positive things that we have. As Dharma practitioners, we have the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We have the teachings in a form that we can use. We can actually practice the teachings to transform our suffering into compassion. And we live in a society which is relatively stable, in which we have the freedom to practice what we want. And compared to other people in the world, we may have financial difficulty and suffering, but compared to many other people in the world, we're in a relatively strong position at the beginning of this crisis. So I just really wanted to leave you with that sort of positive note, if you like, that this is the human condition. This crisis is an opportunity for us to wake up a bit more to what has always been the case in our lives, and hopefully we can use this period as a time where we go deeper in our practice and we make genuine progress in developing the wisdom and compassion of the enlightened mind. So thank you very much for listening. I think we've got a little bit of time now to discuss and ask questions. So perhaps I'll go back to Viryanaga, who can tell us how the questions are going to pan out.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Suddhaka. Yeah, excellent talk. So we'll take questions in a moment from the chat room. So if you do have anything you'd like to ask Suddhaka, do stick them in the chat room. I particularly liked how you drew out in your talk the opportunity and also, the nature of sort of turning towards things in a way. I might just start with a question of my own, if I may, which is I wondered how obviously these reflections are for everybody, and we can undertake them all the time. But as you sort of highlighted, this is the first time that, in a certain way, there's been a global issue that everybody's been aware of, and maybe people are sort of coming across these reflections for the first time. The reflections on impermanence and so on and so forth. And I know quite a few people are fairly anxious or worried about that. And I just wondered if you had any advice for how people who are new to these reflections might reflect on them usefully without creating a sense of anxiety.
I mean, I think in the context of lots and lots of practice of the Metta Bhavana is the answer to that. In a way, I think all of these Buddhist reflections, are putting us potentially more deeply in contact with the nature of reality. And if we're not ready to come into connection with the nature of reality, then we can react to that. We can react with, the sort of classic Buddhist terminology is horrified anxiety. And that actually sort of sets us back. It takes us into a kind of anxious place where it then becomes more difficult to engage with our experience. So I think, with any practice of reflection, it's important to balance the reflection with the practice of the Metta Bhavana, may I be well, may I be happy, and do any reflection on the basis of a very, very strong foundation of positive emotion. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
In a way, it's not like all things are impermanent. How terrible! That means I've got to hide. It's all things are impermanent, and this is all of human life. So I'd have to use the time that I've got to develop my connections with other people, to do what I can to help, to contribute to the enlightenment of all living beings. I guess that's the kind of classical Buddhist idea, isn't it? So something that I wanted to share, because it came up in something we were discussing today, around the language of social distancing. So we've got this phrase that's come up recently, social distancing, and the idea is that we're meant to be counteracting the virus by social distancing. And somebody said, in the context of India, social distancing kind of has overtones of caste discrimination. And there's a theory which I quite like, that all kind of discrimination originates in the fear of infection. Theory. So
that's interesting.
In ancient India, you had a caste of people who were responsible for clearing up all the feces and moving the dead animals. Then you wouldn't allow your children to play with the children from those families, because if they played with them, they might get some kind of infection. And then gradually over time, that process of, that originates in the fear of infection becomes kind of institutionalized as a sort of fear of the other. So one thinks one has to keep away from certain types of people because those people are more likely to be carrying infection. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so a very interesting point.
The language of social distancing, actually, it's a bit inappropriate, because actually we don't need social distancing, we just need physical distancing, actually.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
People who are living in communities together, who are really close friends, if one of them gets infected, you just have to be in a different space to them. Just what I mean? So it doesn't map onto social group or social category. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that. Perhaps we could challenge the language of social distancing. It's not about that. It's about practical, physical distancing, actually. And it's not actually not emotional distancing either, because we think social distancing means kind of being a bit kind of detached from other people, and actually we need the opposite of that. We need greater connectivity.
I think that's a fascinating area. I mean, let's try and pick that up in the discussion groups after this stream, because I think that'd be very interesting to explore, along with your other question around what's the new normal look like? What's the new, the new society in a way? So let's just go over to Adam and just see if we've got any questions from the audience.
Yes, we've got one question from Vajatara. She asks, what effect would it have if we reflected that all beings are heirs to their karma, others as well as us? Would it change our response to others in the current situation?
Did you get that, Suddhaka?
Just say it again. Oh.
Could you say again, Adam? Yeah.
Yes. What effect would it have if we reflected that all beings are heirs to their karma, others as well as us?
Yeah.
Would it change our response to others in the current situation?
I should have to sort of wind into that. I think generally reflecting that others are heirs to their karma works against the tendency to be sort of judgmental of other people, isn't it? Because if say somebody say somebody commits terrorist acts, you may think, oh, they're a terrorist, that's terrible, it's awful to be a terrorist, how can you possibly have sympathy for a terrorist? But if you think, well, the fact that somebody's joined a terrorist group has come about through causes and conditions that have worked their way out through that person's life. When they were a baby, they weren't a terrorist, they were just a baby. So everybody has become what they are and have become the person who does the thing that they do through causes and conditions, and in a certain way that lets us off a kind of absolute judgment of people. So I think reflecting on that way generally leads to a kind of increase in tolerance. I'm just thinking how that would apply to this particular situation. I don't think it means that people who are suffering and getting ill, it's because they've sort of deserved it. I think, you know, there might be a danger of sort of misunderstanding it in that way. I mean, I guess, you know, Bante's given us this model of the 5 niyamas. So if we get the virus, it's likely because we've breathed in a kind of organic particle that somebody else has breathed out, and that's the cause of our illness. And we shouldn't, you know, go anywhere near the idea that there's any kind of moral dimension to who gets ill and who doesn't. I think that would be a very wrong idea. So I don't know if that starts to address the question. Maybe we could go back to that in discussion. You can say a bit more.
It's a big question, isn't it? It's a big question. Yeah. Any more, Adam? No more questions. Okay. So let's wrap up the stream there then. So I mean, thank you very much for joining us, Suddhaka. You're in from your own home, and we're in our home, so it's lovely that we can actually still kind of meet, you know, physically distant but not socially distant. So yeah, just hang on for a moment. I'll just tell people about what we're happening next, and then we can say goodbye together. So first of all, thank you very much for tuning in. And if you've enjoyed the stream and you want to stay in touch with all of what we're doing, all of our activities, do make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and do hit the alert bell so you get a notification when we're online. There'll be videos and also many streams coming up in the coming weeks. So our next event on Saturday, we're not doing a stream Saturday, but we do have a discussion group, a Dharma discussion group, which you're very welcome to join in with. That will be on Zoom. You can see our website for details of how to join that. And then our next live stream will be on Monday, our Monday meditation class, where we'll be continuing the series looking at the hindrances and the antidotes, with looking at ill will and cultivating the opposite of ill will and frustration. So yeah, after that, we're going to have a bit of there'll be a discussion after this group, so do feel free to join in with that. So that will be on Zoom, and there'll be a link to that Zoom discussion in the chat room and also in the description. And if you can't find it there, you can just look on our webpage and it'll be on there as well. So if you want to discuss any of the themes with that Suddhaka has brought up during the course of this talk with myself or Suddhaka, that chat is going to be hosted by Maitranara about quarter to 9. So yeah, go and get yourself a cup of tea, go to the loo, come back, and we can have a discussion if you want. And just finally, just to say, all of our physical classes were all run by donation when we were running them in our Buddhist centre. But now we're online. We're still reliant on those donations. So if you can keep giving, please do so. You'll find a link in the description. It'll just help keep our channel going and make sure we can keep giving you decent content. Okay, so well, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Suddhaka as well, by the looks of it. Do you want to say anything, Suddhaka? Want to say goodbye to people?
No, because I haven't heard. I can't actually hear anybody, so I'm not quite sure who's there. Thank you again. I've just discovered that Vajratara is there, which I'm very pleased to hear. Okay. But, yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'll see you in chat in a moment. Yeah, so thank you again, and do stay safe and stay well, and join us next week for our next live stream. Thanks.